Hello world, it's Jim Parsons, your personal writing mentor. I'm back with lesson 15 of Write That Novel Now. For the past couple of weeks, I've been talking about the mechanics of writing. Things like show, don't tell, starting with a chapter that will grab your reader and using a particular narrative voice. And I think it's time now for me to move back to following that plot structure again. You're probably ready to move on. I would like to believe that you've written your first chapter at the very least. So now you might be getting towards the middle of your story. This is the messy bit. This is the murky stuff where you lose direction. And for some people, it's where you give up. Oh, I don't know what to do now. All these ideas are stirring around in the pot and you just can't find the way to progress the story. So, okay, that's what we're going to look at today. I'm going to look at the middle. And the first thing we're going to do is try to focus on the main plot. Now, what is the main plot? Well, let's do it graphically. Okay, let's use PowerPoint to see how we focus on the main plot. The problem is usually that by midpoint, you've got lots of subplots going on and lots of little side excursions that your character is making so that you can explore their character. And this is what's so confusing at this point in the story. So let's have a look at eliminating some of these other things and just finding this through line, which is your main plot. It's there at the start, it's there at the end. All the others fade away. So let's see what we can do about this. Let's just revise what I'm talking about when I talk about the main plot. And I'm going to be using a nonsense fantasy story. Please don't think I'm trying to be serious with this plot. I'm not. And the other proviso is that, as in quite a few fantasy stories, I use slavery, one nation enslaving another, because slavery has always been an historical topic. Please don't think I'm making light of slavery. It is an abomination. It always has been. And unfortunately, it is still going on in certain forms in various parts of the world. So let's start on this silly story. We have the central character is Quizmerelda. Now, I have it on very good authority that in the entire history of literature, there has never before been a character called Quizmerelda, and I suspect there never will be again. Quizmerelda takes on a dangerous quest, there's our goal, to steal back the golden key to save her enslaved homelands. How does the golden key work to secure release of the homelands? I will carry that secret to my grave. Now, I'm sure you'd like some backstory. And the backstory is that the king of the neighbouring country, a vicious, cruel tyrant, has enslaved their nation. He likes to be called the Fair King because that's part of his propaganda. And also, he likes to be called the Fair King because he really believes he's beautiful. And even though he's quite old, he blondes his hair and wears heaps of makeup to try to pretend that he's young and sexy. Of course, he's not fair. He's absolutely awful, and he's also crazy. And in fact, while they would have their heads chopped off if they were heard doing it, Quizmerelda and her friends behind their hands say that he's Fair King crazy, and they also call him Fair King awful. So let's follow Quizmerelda's journey. She sets out, and as you know, in any good plot, there'll be perhaps some lighter moments where she gets some help or discovers a clue to help her on her way. And in every good plot, that's usually followed by a downward trend. Now, this will be some sort of a setback or a problem that she has to overcome. A bit later in the plot, it might even be a minor disaster. But for the moment, She's got some help here, obviously, or has discovered another clue. Trundling onwards, oh, there's another problem, and these problems are absolutely crucial to your plot. That's what the plot hangs on. That gives her the power to move on. Oh, now the goal is in sight. I bet you're excited now. There's the goal, and you get some further help right at the end. Almost there, almost. The goal disappears, and suddenly the plot arc plummets. What's gone wrong? The fair king has captured her. He ties her hand and foot. In fact, he probably ties both of each, and he puts her in the shark tank. Yes, of course there are sharks there. Now, this, my dear friends, is what is known in the trade as the darkest moment. And the darkest moment is followed almost immediately by the climax. The darkest moment is so crucial because it's where you convince your reader that the protagonist can't possibly attain the goal they've set themselves. The quest is pointless. And in many cases, the protagonist's life is threatened. You convince the reader they're about to die. And then, of course, you have the climax where there's this sudden turnaround. Somehow the protagonist achieves the impossible, right? Makes the grand escape, overcomes the villain. And so here we have Quizmerelda escapes the tank. He slaughters the king, humanely, of course, and finds the golden key and returns triumphant. Impossible, you say. Impossible. Well, you probably have forgotten that back in chapter 6, she saves the elephant herd. And elephants never forget. The elephants communicated telepathically with the rest of the animal kingdom, including the sharks, who were a little reticent to help, but they did see that Quizmerelda was on side. And so instead of eating her, they nibbled daintily at the ropes that were binding her hands and feet, and they set her free. An implausible plot? Hey, come on. I've read the story of Jonah and the whale in the Old Testament. Don't tell me this one's implausible. Okay, where do we go from here? Let me revise what we're looking for. We're trying to isolate from all the other stuff that's in your story by midpoint. We're trying to isolate. That's what we're looking for. The goal at the start that will lead to success or failure at the very end of the book. That's your main line. That's the main plot. And along that way, you're going to be able to identify some things, minor wins, clues that the person discovers, helpers that come on board, skills that they acquire. These are things you must test. Every one of these that you have in your plot to make sure it belongs to this particular goal. If Quizmerelda learns ballet, that skill acquisition has nothing to do with her finding the golden key. So that is not part of the plot. On the downside, there's going to be problems, setbacks, minor disasters. And again, you must set yourself this question. Is this particular plot point, this particular problem or disaster, something to do with this storyline, this particular main plot? This is particularly important because people get confused and start thinking that anything bad that happens must be part of the plot. And I'll just break now and speak to you directly, instead of out of a little window, and talk about this. Yes, I've just mentioned the darkest moment, and that brings up an issue. The darkest moment is going to be the topic of next week's lesson, so I'm preempting it a little bit, but I think it's worth saying at the moment, when we're talking about trying to identify parts of the plot and sort out those that are subplots, so many new writers have trouble identifying the darkest moment. One of the first questions that I ask my novel writing students and my writing mentoring clients is, what is the darkest moment in your story and where does it occur? Quite often, someone will say, oh, the darkest moment is, for example, when her beloved grandfather dies, and that happens in chapter 6. And I can say with absolute confidence, Well, no, that is not your darkest moment, because the darkest moment will only ever happen right at the end of the novel, either in the final chapter or the next to final chapter, the penultimate chapter. That's where the darkest moment will fall. And the other aspect is, while of course the death of the beloved grandfather or the death of any family member or great friend or even the favourite pet, these are deep personal tragedies for your protagonist, but they are not necessarily, in fact, usually not at all, the darkest moment in the plot. Because for any tragedy, for any disaster to have an influence on the main plot, it must relate directly to the goal that's being chased, to the quest. So taking out our darling Quizmerelda, if she's chasing Golden Key and, in her case, her beloved sister is murdered, it is a deep personal tragedy, but it is not relevant to the main plot, because whether her sister is alive or dead makes no difference to whether Quizmerelda goes on the quest. So remember that when you're building your plots, if someone important to your protagonist dies or becomes deathly ill, while it might be important, desperately important to the character, if it doesn't get in the way of what they're pursuing, then it is not a plot point in the main plot. Another example, I mentioned the beloved grandfather. Let's say your character is desperate to be a world-famous ballet dancer. She's got the skills. She just needs polishing, right? Just needs to know the right people. So the goal is to become a world-famous ballet dancer. Beloved grandfather, who has always encouraged her, dies. Personal tragedy, but it is not a plot point in the main plot, which is to get to be a famous ballet dancer. How could it end up as a main plot point? Well, if grandfather died and left her $1 million and she was able to go to the most prestigious ballet school in the world, then yes, then it's a plot point. Or if she was one day away from a crucial interview to get into the most prestigious ballet school in Paris, grandfather dies and she goes home immediately for his funeral and fails to attend the interview. And yes, of course, this is one of the setbacks, major disasters along the line of the main plot. So I hope that clears up that issue, that you could sort these things out by really asking yourself, does it influence whether my character gets to the goal or not? Now, I've been showing you straight through line from that decision to go for a goal through to getting the goal. That's your main story. I don't think it's an accurate representation of what's going on in your head about mid-story or on the page. So let's have a look at the awful truth. Yes, how it really looks mid-story. Did I get it right? Is this what your story looks like, mid-story? By this time, there are several subplots to deal with. Some might be subplots for other characters. Some might be little excursions that your main character is making for him or herself. In this case, you can see that I've got a subplot for a sister, Quat, and a brother called Quizit. So what are we going to do with it? One way to go about it is to remove the subplots, write them out as separate plots so that you end up isolating the main plot line. So let's find the first one, Sister Quat. We'll deal with her. We find out, if you can see that blinking black sign there, we find out that Sister Quat has married Count Sneaky. The next plot point in that subplot is that Count Sneaky is revealed to be a spy for the fair king. Now, it's very likely that only the reader gets to know this. Our poor unsuspecting Quizmerelda has no idea. And so she is betrayed by Count Sneaky. The fair king knows that she's on the way to get the key. And Count Sneaky acts according to his character, and Quizmerelda learns that he has murdered her beloved sister. Well, there's that subplot laid out nice and cleanly for you. I've made much of the fact that she learns her beloved sister is murdered, but from what I was saying in the last break, I hope you understand that it is not so important. It's an enormous personal tragedy and hurt for Quizmerelda, but not of any significance to the main plot. Why? Because it has no influence on whether she gets to that golden key or not. What does have a major influence is the betrayal, so that the king now knows that she's on her way. And you see, this is where our subplot, right, the Count Sneaky subplot, collides with the main plot. It has a bearing, it has an influence on the main plot. The more you can do this, the better. Go back to the mess again and look for the next subplot. And there it is. Her brother Quizet is apprenticed to a merchant. So probably in the first chapter, we'll see Quizmerelda waving her brother off as he goes into a foreign land to be apprenticed to a merchant. And we might follow his adventures for a little while, maybe interleaving a few chapters with the Quizmerelda story. And sooner or later, the reader will learn, as Quizet does, that his merchant boss is actually a slave trader. And as Quizet grows from youth to manhood, he gets involved. He's got to do his boss's bidding. And so he is sent on a slave buying mission. So Quizet ends up at a slave auction in a particular town. And if you've been getting a quick glance at some of the main plot scattered around here, you may have discovered that Quizmerelda gets sold off as a slave. And of course, wouldn't you know it, lo and behold, when Quizet goes to buy slaves, there's his sister, his own beloved sister up there on the blocks, and he buys her with his own money and he sets her free. Because she instantly tells him about his sister's murder, and so Quizet vows to avenge his sister's murder, and he goes off after Count Sneaky. Laying this out very neatly, there they all are. Can you spot where the subplot crosses over the main line plot? There it is. It's where he buys her and sets her free. What about him vowing to avenge his sister's murder? It's in the subplot. It's not part of Quizmerelda's story, because whether he avenges his sister's murder or not has no relevance to whether Quizmerelda gets to the golden. Now, it's going to be a very satisfying plot point in the subplot for the reader. Readers love it when bad guys get it in the neck. Okay, so it has an important function in the story. It'll make the reader very happy when Quizet goes off after Count Sneaky, but it's not in the main plot. Going back to the next subplot, and this is the romance subplot. There's got to be a romance. And this is where it is. Quizmerelda needs to find the hermit in the hermit's cave. It's a fantasy. There's got to be a hermit and there's got to be a cave. And the guide she chooses is Zag, and she falls in love with Zag. And Zag seems to be pretty smitten too, because he says he will marry her if they both escape alive. Not surprisingly, she and Zag are inspired to make passionate love each time they see a waterfall. And there are a lot of waterfalls in this story. Finally, they get to see Hairy the hermit in his cave, and he tells Quizmerelda the secret way into the castle. This is the final piece of the puzzle, the bit she needs. She's got the map she needs, the secret way in, and she's got it. So there's the crossover point, isn't it, in that main plot? And what happens to the romance? Well, this is the end of the romance, because Zag is so inspired by the hermit that he decides to stay with the hermit and become a hermit himself. Oh, hang on. Two hermits together, that's not good, is it? You've got to live separately. Okay, that's that subplot finished. There it is. Now, back to the main plot. That's all that's left. It still looks messy, but this is just the main plot. I've had to zigzag it up the page. Follow me across the bottom of the page from the left. It starts with Quizmerelda making that decision to go find the key. The first problem that she encountered is a flooded river that she must cross. So she climbs into the cement truck and no. She jumps into the river, beats off the piranhas and the crocodiles and swims across. And shortly thereafter is betrayed by Count Sneaky. And we now know that the fair king has been alerted by Sneaky, so he sends out troops to set a trap for her. Now, both of those events may be unknown to Quizmerelda, which makes it extremely tense and exciting for the reader. And when the guards are met up with, of course, our heroine defeats them. Somehow or other, she turns the tables on them, makes fools of them, and she goes through their pockets, and in one man's pocket she finds a map to the castle, including a big X marking the spot where the golden key is kept. Carelessness, such carelessness. And it happens in politics too. So with map in hand, she moves on, and she comes across an elephant herd grazing in the jungle, just in time to see a big game hunter raising his rifle to shoot the bull elephant. No, let's up the ante here. He's shooting the mother elephant with two beautiful babies at foot. He leaps on his back, slaps him around the head, rides him to the ground and overpowers him, and then discovers it's actually the son of the fair king. This is Fair King Awful Jr. She strips him bare, writes on his back in an indelible pen, "You're next, fatso," slaps his rump and sends him home to his father. The elephants are so thrilled to be saved that they make her an honorary elephant. Now, you might think this a silly plot point, but believe me, in the animal kingdom, being made an honorary elephant is a pretty big deal. And frankly, if I was awarded this honor, I'd be pretty chuffed about it, I can tell you. Well, she leaves the elephants and is almost immediately captured by a band of thieves. Of course there's a band of thieves. The thieves decide the best bit of money they can make out of this girl is to sell her at the slave mart in the nearest town. So they take her there, and as you know by now, her brother Quizzit has been sent there to buy slaves. Oh, there's his sister. He spends his own money. Thankfully, he had enough, and he buys her and he sets her free. And I guess it must be about this point that she has the romance, because she's not going to manage her romance while she's captured by thieves. So it's at that point that the romance line comes in and ends with Harry the Hermit telling her the secret way into the... Did you spot the 3 crossover points? Of course you did. Let's simplify it even further. Here's the main plot line. Follow the yellow brick road. And it starts with Quizmerelda making that decision. And, well, it doesn't actually end with her being captured by the fair king. That's just the start of the end. Of course, we have the darkest moment and her triumph when she gains the golden key. You can see I've slotted in where the crossover points are, where the subplots cross over. And you can see the first one there in purple. She is betrayed by Sneaky. Now, it's early in her plot line, and that means you must start that particular subplot early. So let's get it in. Here it is. Curls around there, and it's all over. That's the end of that subplot. The next subplot is where Quizzit frees her about midpoint. So we can start Quizzit's subplot quite early. As I said, we see him waved off by his sister as he goes to foreign land. And we can follow his journey all over the world, exciting things happening to him and finding out that he's been apprenticed to a slaver. And eventually, though, that plot line comes to heel, spins around and collides with the main line where Quizzit frees his sister. Now, I can use this graphic to illustrate another point. illustrate a danger that you can fall into. If one of your subsidiary characters gets a little bit away from you and starts getting some exciting things happening, some good lines to speak, ends up being a much stronger character than the person you presumed was your central character, then you've got a problem you have to deal with. You're going to have to lop him back a little bit. So there's two of our subplots. The next one, of course, is the romance subplot. And look, I do hope you appreciate how much effort I went to draw up the romance subplot. I have honoured Dame Barbara Cartland, the queen of romance. Drawing a heart has meant that I've sort of given them a circular route to follow there. Perhaps they're chasing waterfalls. Eventually they get out of that bad habit and they end up with Harry the Hermit. All right. Have I clarified this or have I just confused you further? I hope I've clarified it, how you need to isolate the main plot and how you can do this by writing out your subplots, making them separate entities for a while and really looking at the mechanics of it. Where do they crash into the main plot? Sometimes they'll do it 2 or 3 times. That depends on your story. Well, I hope you found that useful. Well, it's time to finish up lesson 15. I guess you know what your homework is today. Go through your manuscript or the one that's in your head and try and sort it out into main theme, the main story that's based on that goal, that special goal. That's your main theme. If there are other characters that have a little story that you're including, separate them out. Give them their own plot structure. And if along the way there are some excursions that your central character makes, just show them as little lines going off to the side so that they don't detract, don't get in your way when you're focusing on that main plot. So that's your homework. Until next week, goodbye and keep safe.